Okay, so I'm going to go through those questions that you were set about estimating populations using quadrats, etc. I'm going to go through it sort of point by point, matching it with the mark scheme, and hopefully by hearing the explanations will make more sense than just reading them. So the first question, you were asked to describe how quadrats should be used to estimate the number of dandelion plants in a field. And hopefully through what you've read and what you've watched in the videos, you will understand that the key bit is that the quadrats have to be placed randomly on the field. If you're placing them not randomly, you're going to get biased results. You should also then give an explanation of how you would expect those to be placed randomly. So, example is by dividing the field into a grid and then picking random coordinates to put the quadrat in. The next thing that you have to do is that you've got to place enough quadrats. Sensible suggestion here is about 10 across the whole field. The third point is that once you've counted the number of dandelions in those 10 quadrats, you need to work out the mean value per quadrat. And the final thing, once you've worked out the mean value, you then need to estimate how many is across the whole field. So work out the area of the field, then work out how many quadrats you would fit on the field, and times your mean by how many fit, and that will give you your estimate of the number of dandelion plants. And then B is you're asked to do exactly that for the given example. So you're told that the field measures 40 meters by 145 meters. The students are using a quadrat that measures 0.25 meters squared, and they found a mean dandelion number of 0.40 dandelions per quadrat. So the first stage is that you've got to find out the area of the field, which is 40 times 145. As with anything in science, you can use a calculator if you want. So 40 times 145 gives you 5,800 meters squared. So now there's two ways of working out the estimate from this. First thing is by finding how many of these 0.25 meters squared would fit on that size. So you take your area and you divide it by the size of your quadrat. So you can fit 23,200 quadrats on that field, and then you times the mean by how many quadrats you find on the field. So 23,200 times 0.42 gives you 9,744 dandelions on the whole field. The other way that you can do it is you can work out how many per meter squared, because this is only a quarter of a meter squared. So what you could do is times number of dandelions per quadrat, 0.42 times 4 I'm going to put a line there to show that this is a separate method, which would give you 1.68 per meter squared now, rather than per 0.25 of a meter, and then you times the size of your field by 1.68, and it gives you the same answer. Prove it. Ta-da! In part C, you're asked, in one area of the field there is a lot of grass growing in the same area as dandelions. Suggest why the dandelions may not grow well in this area. So you've got to make a suggestion as to why the dandelions are being affected by the amount of grass growing. And I'm going to underline the word grow, because to get to the full 4 marks, you need to relate your answer back to why the dandelions aren't growing properly. So the first thing is that you mention some factors that having the grass growing may be affecting the dandelions. So they may be competing or having competition for the same resources, and you'd be expected to give examples of those resources. So they may be competing for light, they may be competing for water, they may be competing for space, or they may be competing for minerals. And then you need to link these things to why the dandelions might not be growing as well. Well, light is going to affect their photosynthesis using those biological keywords. Water is also going to affect their photosynthesis, because water and light are both needed for photosynthesis. And go one step further, you can explain that without photosynthesis there will be no glucose to grow. Space, this will affect things like growing roots, and that there'd be, for example, not enough room. And if they're competing for minerals, that means they won't make other important things for photosynthesis, such as chlorophyll. So for question 2, you are again asked to sort of describe how students would set out an experiment to investigate distribution of dandelions. Only this time, rather than across a whole field, they're measuring how distribution changes from one side of a field to another. And this has a special, this experiment has a special different name, and this one's called a transect. Still uses a quadrat, still has basically the same idea, but rather than going randomly all over a field, you've got one line going from one side to the other. And the question says, how did they do this? And again, very similar to the first question in the previous question, you've got to describe how you would do it. So rather than doing it randomly, you would place your tape measure from one end of the field to the other. What you do once you've placed your tape measure down, like it's shown in the diagram, is you place your quadrat, remember, not randomly, but this time at regular intervals. My advice, every meter. And then you would count the number at each measurement, and that's in the quadrat in case that wasn't obvious. So count the number of dandelions in each quadrat each time you stick it down. So 0, 1, 2, etc. all the way along the field. Yes, that would be your 3 marks. Just checking there. Okay, so suggest one reason why the students found no dandelion plants under the trees. So if you refer back to your question, you see that where there are trees, the graph is showing that there are no dandelion plants. So there's only one reason, 1 mark. Obviously there's a few things that you could say here, but there could be the idea that there is less or little light under the trees. Maybe that there's not enough water because the trees are taking it all, or, and this is a more niche example, but that the soil pH or mineral content is wrong for the dandelions to grow. Suggest one reason why the students found no dandelion plants at 16 meters. Again, if you go back, 16 meters, which is right in the middle of the field, has no dandelion plants growing. Now, this is one of those questions where you've got to kind of suggest a reasonable explanation. And because it's kind of up to you, there are quite a few different things you could say as long as they make some kind of sense. So, example, it could have been random that there was no dandelions. It could have been because there was a footpath across the field. It could have been that there was animal waste on the ground, so a cow pat or something like that. So that would stop the dandelions from growing. It had been eaten by animals, or it had been cut down by perhaps a farmer or some other human activity, or that it was an anomaly, which is kind of very similar to the first point. Just means that for some reason there was no dandelions there. So there's your options for that one. Now, last one, I'm just going to fold the page so that you can see the question. Teacher suggested it was not possible to make a valid conclusion from these results. Describe how the students could improve the investigation so that they could make a valid conclusion. So with most experiments and investigations, you've got to do it more than once. So they've measured one transect across the field, but this one line that they've taken might not be representative of the entire field. So things that you could say is that you could repeat the transect at other locations and then you could compare results from those different locations. Okay, hope that helped.